Hello and welcome to another edition of another book review. This week I'll be reviewing Vineland by Thomas Pynchon. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I will be reading for next time. What is there to say about Thomas Pynchon that hasn't been said before? About 4 years ago, I had a question and answer video where I talked about some authors that I appreciate a lot and just haven't gotten around to reviewing. Thomas Pynchon was one of those authors. I think Neil Stevenson, I did end up reviewing a book called Cobwebs, which I'll go ahead and leave a link to below. And I'll link to the other video too if you want to check that out. But he was an author who I've read almost everything of, and this was one of the few books of his that I have not read. I haven't read Gravity's Rainbow and V are the two others that I haven't read. Everything else of his I have read. So Crying a Lot 49, Mason and Dixon, Bleeding Edge, Against the Day, Inherent Vice. I've read all of those books. So he is an author. He's born in the late 30s and is famous for writing about America at these kind of pivotal points in American history as he views them. And his books are usually known for being very esoteric and obscure, having many, many references to different religions and languages and kind of obsolete technologies, and tends to get into very, very have technical, very like technical information about different occupations. In this book, and he's very much known for being a recluse. I think there's a handful of photographs of him, and he pops up every few years to write a novel, and kind of goes back into his reclusivity. And it's kind of known for being just kind of the writer's writer and having structure kind of go out the window. And he has a very unique voice about his writing that if you read enough of his stuff, you can kind of see the similarities across things. There are characters in this book that popped up that were in Inherent Vice. There are characters in this book who are in the Crying a Lot 49. So he has kind of this all these things are kind of in part of the same universe, and so if you read across the books, you kind of see the things that he's interested in. These themes kind of pop up in his stuff again and again. So this book is set in 1984, which is a big part of the plot, and is about a character named Frenessy Gates, who is really the central character. She has a couple of viewpoint chapters, but most of the book is about other characters trying to find her. But she is in a witness protection program and is kind of at the heart of this race of everybody trying to find her. She was someone who in the 1960s was a member of a kind of anarchic film collective called 24 Frames Per Second and 24 FPS, and they were at the center of this creation of this film or documenting this time period where there's this university that had kind of become a rogue state, and she has entered in kind of witness protection program for reasons that I don't want to spoil, because I think that's kind of one of the more interesting parts of the book. And the book is really all these other characters trying to find her for one reason or another. There are people who used to work with her. She has a daughter with a man named Zoid Wheeler, who kind of starts out the book as the protagonist before kind of dropping out of the narrative about a quarter of the way through. And if you've read Pynchon before, there's a lot of his kind of proclivities in this book. There's, like I mentioned, the kind of esoteric knowledge. There is characters breaking out into song. There's an appreciation for kind of musicians and kind of people on the outskirts of society. And so that's all here. And this to me was like one of his more accessible books. I usually base how accessible his stuff is depending on how much annotations I need to read it. And I thought this book was deeper in some ways and made me think a lot about his relation to technology in a way that I had actually thought maybe ironically less about than when I read something like Bleeding Edge, which was I think the last book of his that was published. And so I appreciated that aspect of the book a lot, and some of his best sentence to sentence writing in terms of just the power of the prose itself is in this book. I think this is one of his best written novels. Um, the character of Zoid Wheeler and Zoid Wheeler trying to kind of learning a lesson. There's a lot of like love triangles are a kind of common theme in his books, and there's a love triangle in this as well. but I think it ends differently than a lot of the other love triangles that kind of showed a little bit of emotional maturity on his point on his part, um, that I also kind of appreciated. And knowing that he wrote this, I think this came out in like 1990, so at this point he was in his early 50s. Um, so if I was to recommend it to people who have read him already, that's what I would recommend. I think it is kind of a different side of him, and I think it's probably his most. I don't. It's hard to say his most political because all his books to some degree are political, but I think it's kind of the most clear eyed about his personal politics in reading this, and you kind of there are what feels like author inserts in a lot of places about him, what he values, what he doesn't appreciate about the state, and you have a lot of that in this book. The book ends. There's a chapter, the last chapter in the book. To me, it ends kind of with a pretty clear distillation of the author's viewpoints on certain things. Karma is a big theme throughout the book, so you have a lot of karmic imbalances and payments that are due. Um, yeah, and so I really enjoyed all those things. I think this is one of my. I would say for me, this is probably closer to the middle of the pack. I tend to like Inherent Vice quite a lot. Crying Lot 49 is the book that I always recommend. It's probably my favorite of his stuff. Against the Day is really good. I think I like this a little bit more than Mason Dixon, which was really, really esoteric and really, really difficult for me to get through. Maybe I'll go back and reread that and appreciate it. But of the stuff that I've read, this was quite good. The stuff that I didn't like, there were a lot of digressions in this book, and the definitely the last like third of it felt a little long. There's a digression or two about one of the Prairie, who is the daughter of Zoid, has a pretty lengthy section about her and another girl shoplifting, and where that is placed in the book kind of feels like it could have been cut. The book jumps around kind of purposely as far as the timeline of the novel, so you have to be paying attention to when things happen and why. It's not ever a linear narrative, and I think that got confusing at times. And so, but that's kind of, again, these are things that are common in his books. Um, if there were some things I would have changed if I could have gone back and changed those. Pynchon will go for pages to pay off a joke, and there's a couple of those things here where it's like, given the length of the book, maybe you could have cut it. I think the book is like, I listened to an audiobook, I think it was like 17 or 18 hours. And so there's some things like that could have been cut. It's purposely kind of challenges you to kind of forego certain things that you may believe going into the book. And I think it starts off one way with Zoid being the protagonist and kind of takes a sharp left turn into all these other characters. And I think that's kind of purposely done. And you have to be willing to kind of go on that ride. And I think part of that was him kind of, he has like a brand as far as there's this character who's trying to solve this mystery. And that to me is him trying to say, this is going to be different than the other books, with Zoid kind of dropping out. I thought that was really clever. So I would say if you have never read him before, I'd say if you have read him before, definitely check this out. I think this is one of his more accessible novels, and I like a lot of what he's doing. This is like the most like 60s of his books that I've read outside of maybe Crying of Lot 49. This is very much someone looking back on the 60s and asking what went wrong. And so if that appeals to you at all, you're gonna enjoy the book. There's a lot dealing with television in this book and the power of television and how television can be used as the opiate of the masses to make certain ideas more palpable to people, and how it can serve to kind of sever community in a way. And I thought that was the most direct book that I've seen him talk about television in that way. And so that's kind of one of the main themes that runs throughout the book. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. If you have read him before and you enjoyed reading his stuff, I would recommend checking it out. If you've never read him before, I would probably still say Crying a Lot 49 to me is probably, it's the shortest. It's the easiest. I don't know how long V is. So the other books of his that I've read, it's the shortest. And I think you have to have the least amount of like pre knowledge going into the subject. And I think you can give Crying a Lot 49 to a college student, give them some facts about the 60s, and they can go in. This book really is pretty dense with stuff. You have to have either, I read it with annotations, and so that was helpful, but also there's a lot in there about the film industry is a part of the book. There is a lot in there about this university, this kind of this fake school, and the politics of the time. And there's a whole subplot about ghosts that you have to kind of uh, interpret however you want to interpret. So it's a lot less straightforward than Crime Law 49, which is like relatively here's what it is, and it has less of those accoutrements of like these other layers of the story, and tonally, I think that book's a little, again, still a little bit more grounded than this. This is him kind of moving towards aspects of spirituality and things like that that are beyond kind of the normal world. It's one of the reasons I wanted to review this is I guess that Paul Thomas Anderson, it's rumored to have an adaptation of this coming out. It's a very loose adaptation, and if so, it'll be interesting to see what he does with it. His Inherent Vice, I thought was fine. I wasn't blown away by it. I thought the book was better than it, but I also realized that when you're adapting one of Thomas Pynchon's stuff, the tonal swings are so huge that it's almost impossible to put them in a movie, and it makes it very, very difficult to adapt it straight. And so it'll be interesting to see what he does with it. Its second adaptation and adaptation, and see what he brings to it and what he kind of leaves on the cutting room floor. So, and the Zoid Wheeler character, how he deals with that. If Leonardo DiCaprio is playing that character, he in this book he's like probably a quarter of the novel, and so if I don't know if he's going to use Leonardo DiCaprio to be kind of bait to kind of come into the story for the audience and kind of have this other story occur. I enjoyed it. If you have read Vineland, please feel free to leave me a note below. I know that a lot of reviewers at the time were a little bit more chilly on it, and over time it's grown into with esteem. Like I said, sentence to sentence, I think it's some of his best writing. I think it's the stuff where he goes into the 60s the deepest. If you are someone who needs to have like a cause and effect and everything kind of handed to you, this is probably not that book, because there's still questions of why certain characters acted certain ways. And like a lot of his books, Inherent Vice and famously Crying Law 49, not everything is kind of wrapped up. You have to kind of bring your own interpretation. So if you've never read any of his stuff, again, I would start those places first. If you've enjoyed his stuff in the past, then maybe try this, because there's a modern sensibility to this that I also, I mean, the book is still 35 years old, but there's a modern sensibility to this that I enjoyed. I didn't really feel overwhelmed with the kind of the esoteric knowledge. And there are annotations on the internet, so if you want to check those out, you can. So, and I may leave the annotations below too if you want to check the notes out there. Next time, I believe I'm going to be reading the screenwriting book Kill the Dog. I'm still waiting on my copy, so I don't have a cover to share with you, unfortunately. If you have read Vineland, please feel free to leave a note below. I'll leave a link to the videos. I'll leave a link to my Twitter, so if you want to follow me on Twitter there, please feel free, if you've enjoyed this, to like and subscribe to the video. And until next time, bye.